So this is the second part of the composition and textures within Illustrator for Art 120 illustration. So at this point, if you've already followed along with part one, you should have something like this within Illustrator here. We've image traced the elements, we've opened up our Pantone color system, and we have assigned some sort of or we've ungrouped it and then assigned some sort of colors to the individual shapes within our composition, very similar to how we did in Photoshop. So now we want to come in and start applying some textures to these individual shapes as well. So for this part, I want you guys to download the textures file that I've included in Edmodo. It's from Redpeg, and again, these are free textures that you can find online. You can also create your own, but we'll be looking at that a little bit later as well. But it's a great resource to be able to pull some textures that you can apply towards some of your designs as well. So we have several different textures that are already vectorized here for us. We can just click into these and copy them and paste them into our artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and work with this bottom right one here. I'm going to go Command-C to copy. And I'm going to go back to my composition and I'm going to go Command-V or paste into my artwork here. Now it's a little bit small, so I'm going to go ahead and expand this. I'm going to grab a corner, and as long as I hold Shift, it should constrain those proportions. And if I hold Shift and Option at the same time, it actually pulls from the center versus one of the sides, which I find kind of helpful. So something like that seems to be working pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and shift it to kind of fit my artwork a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and apply this to this shape right here. So just by laying it in there, right now the color of this texture is white. Again, I could go in and designate any color for this particular vectorized texture and it would reflect that. But for this particular practice, we're going to go ahead and just keep that white to see how that looks. So as you can see, the texture is applied to this shape, but it's also spilling out into these other shapes. So we're going to use a clipping mask similar to how we did in Photoshop, but it's just done a little differently here in Illustrator. So if we have that in place, I'm going to bring that down just a little bit in size so it kind of fills that space a little bit more. I like the size of that right now. I'm going to go ahead and just move this texture out of the way for right now. And I'm going to copy this texture first. So I'm going to select the texture, go to Edit, Copy. And I'm going to go ahead and select the shape that I want that texture to go into. Now, the clipping mask is done a little differently here in Illustrator. So in Illustrator, we're actually going to use our transparency option to apply this clipping mask. So if you don't see your transparency up, you can go ahead and go to Window and Transparency. And you should see something like this here for your transparency box to be able to start adjusting that. So within this transparency box, you'll see a button that says Make Mask. And there's a couple different steps to create this clipping mask here. So the first thing we're going to do is click Make Mask. And what that's done is it's created a complete mask of black for this, essentially blocking out this entire shape. So we're actually going to uncheck this clip right here. That should bring back our color. And then we're also going to click on the invert mask. So it's important to click Make Mask, then unclick the clip and click on the invert mask. A little tongue twister there. So now what we have is very similar to Photoshop. We have our actual shape and then we have our clipping mask right next to it. And you guys are familiar with the lock between the two and the two different thumbnails as well. So to apply that texture that we've already copied into this particular shape, we actually want to be selected on the thumbnail of the clipping mask, not of the shape. So you want to make sure that the thumbnail of the clipping mask is highlighted here. And we can actually just go Command-V or paste and position the texture within that part of the shape again that we want it to be. And if we click outside of that, you'll see now that this texture is only within that shape. It's not actually going within the other shapes, which is exactly what we wanted. We just wanted it to stay within that shape. And the other thing that you might notice is if you drag over this, right now this all of this artwork is on white, so it's hard to tell, but if we click back into the artwork thumbnail of the clipping mask, we can actually bring this whole shape over the gray And what we'll notice is it's not just that this texture is white, it's actually, this texture is actually knocked out of this shape now. If I bring this shape to the front, we can see that I'm able to see through this shape to everything behind it. So we've actually used that texture as a sort of poking holes through the shape to be able to see through the rest. So that can be really helpful if you're doing some sort of distressing to some sort of t-shirt design or some sort of artwork that you then want to apply over an additional color or additional layer and have that see through. So anytime we want to adjust that, we can just click back into the clipping mask and adjust that texture within this. And I want to do one other thing here within this clipping mask before we exit this. If I go back to my textures, I'm going to go ahead and just click on another texture here to bring in. So I'm going to go up to Edit, Copy, or Command C, go back to my composition. And as long as, again, I'm clicked within the clipping mask, I shouldn't be able to click anything else outside of that clipping mask. I can go ahead and Command V or paste this new texture within here. And again, I'm going to hold my Shift and Option to expand that to make it a little bit larger to fit within here. And we should have a very similar look here. It's sort of taking away any color that's within that shape. But what we're going to do a little differently here is we're actually going to change the color of this and see how it affects this texture as well. So if we click on the color picker over here, you can see that right now this is white, and that's allowing us to see through. Now if we go all the way down to black and click OK, you'll notice that we don't actually see any of the texture because it's not hiding anything. It's essentially saying, since it's black, it's not going to hide anything. White is going to be what hides the color. Black is going to be what reveals it, essentially. So what we can actually do is, instead of making it pure black, we can maybe make it some sort of grayscale and see how that changes, just to knock out somewhat of the color, but not everything. So I'm going to go up to, in my color picker here, I'm going to go ahead and slide down to somewhat of a darker gray, but not totally black or totally white. And what we'll see now if I click outside is that it didn't omit all of it, but it omitted some of that. So that just kind of adds a nice little layer of texture, some sort of distressing on top of what's already totally gone. It's kind of added in this distressing that is partially gone as well. So it's nice to sort of layer those and see how they're affected a little bit differently. And if we wanted to erase the other one, we could just be left with something a little bit more subtle there as well. But I'm going to kind of keep both of these in to work together for this particular one. Excuse me. So we've applied two different textures into this particular shape using the clipping mask. I'm going to go ahead and click back into the thumbnail of my artwork so that I can make additional adjustments into additional shapes here. So the next thing that I want to show you guys is how to create your own textures very simply as well. And one way that we can do that is by using the brush tool. So if we click over here on our tool panel and bring up our brush tool, we can actually then bring up the window for our brushes here. And within that window, I already actually have it pulled up here, artistic brushes, but I'm going to go ahead and close that and go back over to my brushes palette. I can actually, within my brushes palette here, I can click on my little hamburger and go up to Open Brush Library, very similar to how we did with the swatches to find the Pantones. And I'm going to go to Artistic maybe, and let's go to Artistic Paintbrush. And what that should do is bring up several different paintbrushes for us to use here. So for this one, I want to make my fill be none, and I want my stroke to be white for this one. Let's see if I can, I'll just go ahead and click into my select color here and make that white. And I'm going to go ahead and just click on one of these brushes to start using. And I'm just going to make some kind of scratches here, almost like there's some sort of distressing that was going on with this texture with some sort of scratches. And I might pick another brush and just vary up how those look a little bit. Create some that are bigger and some that are a little bit smaller, just creating a little bit diversity within these scratches. And maybe add one or two more, just kind of playing it up a little bit here. Yeah. So once you have something like that, you've just created a bunch of random marks with our brushes. We can actually turn this into a texture really easily. So in order to do so, we're going to go to our arrow tool, and we're just going to click and drag over all of these different brush marks that we've made. And now we're going to come up here to Object, Expand Appearance. And what that does is it's no longer creating those as strokes, as brushes. It's actually creating those as shapes now. So from here, we can start to apply this in the same way that we did. So we can just copy that. We can come over to another one of our shapes and select one of our shapes by going into our transparency panel right here. We can again go to Make Mask, unclick the clip, and click on the invert mask. And now it's important that we paste into the appropriate thumbnail here. Right now the default is selected onto the thumbnail of the artwork, but we actually want to be in the thumbnail of the clipping mask. And you shouldn't be able to click anything else when you're inside that clipping mask of this shape. But since we've already copied that, we're selected into the clipping mask, we can just hit Command V or paste. And again, you'll start to see how we can now apply this within this particular shape here. And by utilizing this custom sort of texture that we've made, we're able to kind of fit it within this shape. And we can distort this because there's no real proportions that I'm trying to stick to for this particular one. I might elongate it a little bit to kind of stretch. I can get it into position how I want it. And I'm going to go ahead and click outside of that and see how I like that. And that looks pretty good. And as long as I click back in my artwork now, I can make any other adjustments that I need to within my artwork. So what I'm encouraging you guys to do is play with some of the textures that are available within our textures here, within the particular shapes after we've assigned colors. And I also want you to use your brushes to maybe experiment with making some of your own sort of marks. Again, selecting all of those, going up to Object, Expand, and then using those as a texture within the artwork as well. So as always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me via email, or I'll be in the classroom walking you guys through this as well.